It's recording everything, including your voices. Yeah. So, so back to collections. The one thing I didn't show you, because it doesn't need to be shown until you've made a few collections, is where to put them. They give you a little bit of a folder-like structure for collections. So collections can live in collection sets that resemble a file cabinet drawer. They've got a little bigger icon and they've got a little drawer thing in the front. So it looks like this. So when you want to organize your collections, you can drag and drop them into these sets, or you can make the sets on the fly. So I'll show you how to do that. When you go back to the collections panel, instead of create collection or create smart collection, create collection set, and you might want to call that something specific. So just for lack of a better idea, I'll do Burning Man, and that could contain Burning Man different years, or I could just do it like this, 2017. And notice that when you create a set, it asks if you want to put it in another set. If you create a collection instead of a collection set, it'll ask you if you want to add it to a set as well. So it's already trying to help you organize by using this checkbox. I am not going to put this in an existing set. I want it to float freely above this one. So there it is. It created a new set. Notice the icon difference. Can you see it from back there? One's slightly bigger and looks like a drawer. And let's say I want to drag this one and put it into that set. It is drag and drop friendly. It lights up blue when you're getting onto it, and that's all there is to it. So you can move collections from set to set as you develop a pattern of librarianship or keeping your stuff organized. Everyone does it one way, and then they evolve and they do it a different way and they change it. But the main point is that from collections, you can go from collections to develop collections to any of these modules in Lightroom, and so it's a handy way of getting a selection of photographs that you care about into the different parts of Lightroom, or to export them to me, or to export them to online. So that's the importance of collections, is assembling selected images in a way that doesn't change your real folder structure of where the images live. Okay? Everyone got the idea on that? All right, cool. Does anyone remember how I can turn any collection into a target collection temporarily? Shout it out. Right. Right click. I don't have a right click set up, so I'm going to use control click. And there it is, set as target collection. It's that easy. Like I said, unfortunately, Aaron asked a good question. There's only one at a time. I have created a mock-up of an interface, a wireframe of it, that I sent to Adobe 4 years ago that said, why can't we have multiple collections so that we can do things during the day and not have to keep remembering to point and click. And it's under review, but it's been under review for years, so it's unknown whether it'll ever happen. So collection sets are a way to further organize. One thing to be aware of is if you start nesting things too deeply, you run out of space to see their titles, because you can only make this so wide, and you'll start to not see the names. So try to name your collections and your collection sets logically and in a way that most of the information is up in the front part of the sentence. That way you'll be able to find everything. Now, how collections differ from folders is collections are virtual, folders are actual folders in your computer. But the same goes true for moving folders around. Once you put images in Lightroom, I'm sure Jason told you this, I hope he told you this, don't move them outside of Lightroom. Use Lightroom to move your folders to different places, or to move your files to different folders. The reason is that Lightroom's only a database, and it knows where you did things and what you did to them, but if you do them outside of Lightroom, Lightroom doesn't remember. And that's the most common thing when people say, I lost my photos, they all have question marks, or the whole folder has a question mark. That's probably because you renamed the folder outside, or you did something like that.
Yeah, I just did that earlier. I renamed my hard drive.
Yep. It gets bummed out. So you can do that, and there's a way to fix it, so I'll show you that. But good housekeeping is to use Lightroom to do all that work, even though we're kind of we're used to the Mac environment where you can do anything you think of. But once your stuff's in Lightroom, you want to try to follow through it in Lightroom. So I'm going to also show you that, and I think I pointed this out earlier today, is that right click or control click is a secret way of shortcutting almost anything you want to do in Lightroom. So I always use it on a thumbnail, whether it's from down here or on the grid, to find all the things that I want to do to that photograph. You can even say add to target collection, although I gave you the B key. But there's just a ton of things. So I advise, as you're learning Lightroom, to right-click on everything and see what your options are. And it'll keep you from hunting around the menus. Another thing that I'll point out now that I'm back in the folders section is if you accidentally forget and you rename a folder outside of Lightroom, or you move the folder to a different place because you think you're being more organized, that's fine. What you do is right-click or option-click, control-click on that, and it'll say search for folder or relink folder. It'll say something about that that lets you go there. My folders are not lost yet. Well, in order to prove this out, what I'll do is I'll go here and I'll right-click on it. And one of the cool things that's in this list is Show in Finder. If you're on a PC, it'll say Show in Explorer. So out pops the very window that's got your real stuff in it. That's super helpful. So I'm going to make a mistake. I'm going to rename this Practice 1 just to prove that we can get back and fix the problem if it happens to you. I renamed it Practice 1. Everything's fine. Look at the folder now. Grayed out has a question mark. It'll still show me what's in it, but they all have exclamation marks, meaning they're lost. Cannot be found. Would you like to locate it? So yes, you can go and locate each photo individually, but what you really want to do is relink Lightroom to the original folder because it got renamed or it got moved. So again, you do that right click or control click. If it's the only thing you learned today, that's fine. No, it's not. Find missing folder. I'd go back and look for it wherever it is, and once I dial it up, then I just have to click on it. DNGs for PS practice, and notice it's got my 1 in it. Just hit Chose or Choose, and it appends the real name to it, and it finds everything again. So that's a big panic for a lot of people, is I lost my stuff. Chances are you didn't. You can kind of fix almost any problem in Lightroom. And I can only assume that you learned about rejecting photos and editing that way and kind of cutting down your shoot. Did you do any of that?
Not for me.
Okay. Is there anyone who doesn't know how to go through your shoot and reject images for deletion?
Actually, I had a question
Yeah.
for that. So, I usually when you delete all the rejected photos and it brings up that pop-up with delete from this, blah 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 blah.
Or just remove from Lightroom.
Right. So I usually just delete them just because I know those are pretty common. I don't need
They're
those.
gone.
But if I do press the other option, where does it send those, or where does it keep those in case I want to get it back?
Let's try it. So if you just hit, pardon me, that got recorded. So I rejected these by hitting the X key. That's what puts a black flag. Here, bring this up a little bit. That's what puts a black flag on photographs you assume you're going to throw out, and it also dims them down. Okay, so that's the black flag. If you just hit delete, it just says remove the 3 selected photos from Lightroom. That's just taking them out of Lightroom. It's leaving them in your drive. So what I tend to do is, whoops, What do I do here? Now I'm screwing up. Yeah, it's one of the commands. Of course, it's not happening because I'm teaching. Maybe it's shift. Oh well. It's just not working. Let me go here. Remove photos. Let's see what happens. Yeah, normally it'll say remove from Lightroom or delete from disk. If you're sure you're not going to want them again, and you should be sure if you're going to reject them, then delete from disk. I'll get that to show up in another lesson when I'm doing it right. For some reason, it's not working right now. So just remember that you can relink orphaned, we call them orphaned folders. You can relink individual photos that you might have renamed outside of Lightroom or done something funky to if they ever have a question mark on them. If you open a photograph, let's say you have a DNG or a RAW, and you go and do something with it outside of Lightroom, like you open it up in Photoshop's Adobe Camera Raw and you make some changes. Adobe Camera Raw should write all those changes to the XMP file, that little metadata file, or if you're doing DNGs, it writes it right into the DNG file. And so when you open up Lightroom, it should correctly show those changes. That's the idea behind the two Adobe programs working together. Occasionally, you'll get this symbol, and it says the metadata for this photo has changed in Lightroom, save changes to disk. And you usually want to say yes. If you open it up in Capture One or do something else to it, and it makes a change outside of an Adobe document, then you may want to tell it to update from whatever's on the disk, not whatever's in Lightroom. You'll have to find out from trial and error how that works for you, because I don't have that application here in the computer. But it suffices to say that you can kind of fix any problem that happens except for having your hard drive fail. Everyone knows that magnetic drives, the ones with spinning disks in them, it's not if they're going to fail, it's when they're going to fail, because they're all moving parts. SSDs can fail too, but at a much slower rate. So if you can afford SSDs, go that way. I know they're expensive for the, considering you can get a 4 terabyte hard drive now for probably $120 at Costco or something. And same thing in SSD would probably be over $800. So just get the best you can and be kind to them and try not to drop them. Yeah, LaCie makes some of the orange rubber bumper. Those are drop tested. I've broken 6 of them, so I don't buy them anymore. Just take better care of my stuff. The other thing to watch out for is obviously magnetism. Don't leave your drives on top of something that's magnetic, like the counter at the store. It's got that little device on it. Weird stuff like that. So that's the thing about folders. Just remembering that right-click or control-click is your secret to things you need to do. One of the things I pointed out before is, like, on my main catalog, I have so many folders and so many nested folders that if I see a photo, it's going to take me a long time to figure out where it really lives in Lightroom. So the easy way to get there is to control or right-click right on the photo and say, go to folder in library. And that doesn't mean the library down the street, it means the library in Lightroom. Or go to collection that you put it in. And the cool thing is that it'll show you when that photo lives in more than one collection. And you'll be able to just dial up whichever you want. So I can't explain enough how important it is to learn that right-click, control-click, because it's going to save you a hell of a lot of time going forward. Another thing you can do is, one of my habits is to sometimes move things into a folder outside of Lightroom. But then I want Lightroom to update and see the contents that I've added. So that's easy to do. All you do is, I have to simulate it to show it to you for a second. So I'm going to go and simulate that. Let's see. I'll find something on my hard drive, on my desktop, that I can add. If I'm lucky. Here's a JPEG. I'm just going to put it in this DNGs for PS I'm going to move it there temporarily. I'm going to go back to Lightroom, and it's not going to show because Lightroom does not dynamically live update itself the way some other applications do. But if I know that I've added things such as, let's say you do a Photoshop file out of some things that you worked on in Lightroom and you've now made a big layered file, you want it to be in Lightroom with the other stuff that's like it, then all you do is go to that folder that you just updated, hold down that magic control key or right click, and you'll see something you don't normally see because it's not there unless you've made a change. It's called Synchronize Folder. This one thing is going to save your ass a lot because you're going to be confused as to why the things you've done are not reflected in Lightroom. Hit Synchronize, and it will tell you, it'll show you a count up here of anything that's been changed, and then if it is, you could just hit Synchronize. It's also a way of getting other metadata from other programs to synchronize into your files, and then that file will show up. So just keep that one in mind. So one of the things that I asked you to do for homework, I'll be happy if you can just make collections, but the only way you'll be able to show them to me is to be able to export them to me. So let me show you the process for that. It's also outlined in that PDF I gave you, and I'm also going to be hopefully recording this now so you'll be able to see it happen. So the way to share things between people or between catalogs is to export them. So if we've got collections that are made, so I've made several collections here, and you'll make your own. All you need to do is click on the collection itself or the set that it is nested in, and this will allow me to import all the things in here. I was going to say, oh, you know, what if you could just add them together like that? Well, I'm command clicking them to add them together. So you can either grab the collection set that contains them. If you don't have a set, just click on, you know, command click or control click for Enrique, as many of these as you want, and they'll be counted at one time on the export. So here's what you do. So I've selected these 4. I'm going to hold down the control click, and it doesn't give me what I expected, which is allowing me to export these, but it's right here under the File menu, Export as a Catalog. This is the way that you can share with me what your Lightroom looks like at the state that you export it. And when you make your collections for homework, you'll be able to show them to me by exporting me a catalog of your work. Name it however you want. You can call it Week 1 Homework, but of course what's missing from this title? Name. And you'll be putting it in a different folder. You'll be putting it in this one here. Hold on. Homework from week 1. And here's what it's going to do. Oh, here I gave you different folders to put them in, but you don't have to do that anymore. You'll be able to put them in all together. So I'll delete these folders because you won't need them. Don't worry about it. Just find the homework from week 1 folder and just put your week 1 collection in there with your name on it. Here's the way we're going to do it. This is completely spelled out in 2 graphics that I gave you inside the folder, but I'll go through it now live and then I'll show you the graphics I made. All you do is ignore export selected photos only, because notice I've only got 1 selected. Ignore export negative files in this case because I don't want your actual pictures. I just want to see what it is you've done. And include the smart previews. Remember I told you what smart previews are for? If you include smart previews, that means that even if you didn't write them, like let's say you're showing me old files that you haven't done smart previews for, This will make them at the time on the fly. So you can check that off. You just choose its destination, you say export catalog, and it rips through it in no time because it's not trying to export the real files. That was unchecked. And just to check it out, I'll go to the Dropbox folder. There we are. Make a hut. You guys know about doing this? Grabbing stuff and putting it in your sidebar? Very bloody helpful. Homework week 1. Julian week 1 homework. Inside it is your catalog, no photos. Your catalog, your previews, blah, blah, blah. It's not your whole catalog, right? The whole one with all your work. It's just the one that you exported. I'll open it now, just so you can see what that looks like. It closes one, opens the other. Wait for a second for it to populate. And that is what... No. There it is. So that's what you'll be doing over the next week. Shouldn't be too hard, right? Any questions on that? And I'll just remind you that I did include a couple of graphics here. Lessons week 1. This was that folder that said practice exporting Lightroom collections. So interesting, if I select, like back there when I showed you, I selected a couple of these and then I went to the right click and it didn't have the export feature. If you click on a set, which is one good reason to make them because it helps nest a lot of collections that should be in the same place, it does have the export this collection as a set, but you don't as a catalog. But you can always go to the file menu and just find it there. So that's one graphic, and the other graphic is how to name it and what to check on and check off. So that's there to help you out. So we've only got a little bit more time. I just want to check on my syllabus and see where I'm at, see what I have to move to next week. Yes, this is all being recorded. Watch what I say. Oh yeah, exporting to Photoshop. May as well cover this now since we're here. Now here's a DNG. These are reduced DNGs. That's one thing that you can do with DNGs you can't do with raw files, is you can make smaller versions of them. For whatever reason you might want to. I make smaller versions so that I'm not hogging up your hard drives with big fat files from some of the older cameras I use. So when you're making an exported DNG from Lightroom or from Photoshop's Adobe Camera Raw, you can choose the resolution you want it to have. It's lossy though, like a JPEG. Just an FYI on that. So some people said that they weren't sure exactly how to go round trip from Lightroom to Photoshop. So here's how you do it. Select a photo, go to the photo menu up here, or what did I just do? I right-clicked, edit in. Oh, they're all grayed out. I gotta watch myself here, make sure that I didn't do something wrong. Okay, why are these grayed out? Freaking me out here. Oh, because there aren't any photos. Duh. All right, got to open up the right catalog here. What I will do is the one that I'm getting confused because I've opened up so many catalogs. So let's see if it's in here. And if not, I'll open up my own catalog. Yeah, all right, let me open up my own catalog. These aren't really connected. These are just smart previews. Is anyone here under the false impression that professional photographers have gone through all of their photographs and edited them down? Good. They haven't. We all have tens of thousands of photographs we haven't gotten to yet. Just a little aside, so this is Prague stuff. When I start Xing my photos with the X key in order to reject them, I don't delete them until I'm done with the whole edit. Because sometimes I'll find that the one that I rejected is the only one I have that's worth keeping. I thought that there'd be others down the line, so I wait till the end to do that. I used to be motivated to do it sooner to get hard drive space back, but I've upgraded to bigger drives. So here I am. I'm going to take a photograph. I want to get to something that's that is a raw file. Even if it's rejected, that's fine. I'm just going to show you how this works. Photo menu, edit in, and the first thing on the menu is edit in Adobe Photoshop. And that'll open it up in Photoshop, let you do anything you want. As it saves, it cannot save it back as an RAF file or DNG or whatever you have. It saves it as a TIFF. And you can set Lightroom to open your files the way you want them to open them and save them as a TIFF or a PSD, how much bit depth, 8 or 16, and whether even to rename them. But I'm just going to go through the process of opening it up so you'll see how that works. Now this will open it up as a regular background layer. Did you guys get into smart objects?
Yeah.
Does everyone feel like they know what smart objects are and how to use them? Because that's also part of my lesson flow, so I figured I'd get into it unless you all really knew it. What? Yeah, I feel like a refresher is a good idea. We've got plenty of weeks to do this. So there it is in Photoshop. I'm going to make a tiny little difference and then save it so you see the round trip. Actually, I'm not going to make a tiny difference. By the way, it's a whole monastery in Czechoslovakia. 40,000 people's bones. Very strange place. Okay. I'm going to do something radical so we can see the difference back in Lightroom. Save it. I'm trashing it because it was a rejected photo. I know, slash and burn editing, right? Saved it. Command S, Command Q for quit. Bye. Check it out. It's a TIFF. And let's see what it looks like. I'm going to have to hit the I key, which puts information. You have two levels of information. The first I shows you whatever you program Lightroom to show you when you do the first info. The second info can be other data. So it added the word edit to the file name so that I know that that's what it is. So that's called round trip editing from Lightroom to Photoshop and back in. The cool thing is that you can also round trip out to any other apps that you contain, like if you use Nik or now they're DxO. Anyone use any of that stuff? Nik or DxO effects? Oh, good. I have something very cool to demonstrate another time, and I will. So that's round trip out. That literally means that you start in Lightroom, you tell Lightroom what to do, Lightroom does it, Photoshop does its thing, and then it knows to go back because it's an Adobe product, so it's round tripping. The other thing you can do with a raw file, and we'll get deeply into this in the weeks to come, I'll take another RAF file, is you can open up as a smart object. Because once you open up from Lightroom just in Photoshop and it makes a flat layer, you don't have a smart object anymore. If you double click a raw file and it opens up in Adobe Camera Raw, which is Photoshop's version of Lightroom, then of course you can export that to Lightroom as a layer that's a smart object. Does everybody understand what I'm talking about there? Just the idea of a smart object? Okay. So what Lightroom does is it lets you go to Edit In, and instead of going Photoshop, you go down here, Open as Smart Object in Photoshop. I'm not quite sure why they put that all the way down here, but by the way, these are all plugins. So these are the things, I'll show you a couple of these at another time. Whoops, I accidentally chose it, didn't mean to. Edit In, Open as Smart Object. Let's see what the difference is. Takes a little longer to open because it's opening up a smart object, which is basically the raw file embedded in a layer. So smart objects are smart because you can continually re-edit them and they update wherever they are. It's also the way that designers can import images in Photoshop and then later on go and change that Photoshop image and it'll re-update in the design. So if I want to make a change to this image, I can make it in Adobe Camera Raw because this is a smart object as shown by this little square icon on the corner. And if I double click this, it opens up in Camera Raw. So that's something you're already familiar with. A lot of you are probably using Camera Raw instead of Lightroom. Any changes I make here, I'm going to get something wacky going on. And I say OK. Again, when I save this, it can't save it back as a raw. I'm going to go out of Photoshop. So you can round trip either as a regular layer or as a smart object layer. It's up to you. You can even set it up so that you can do it with a key command. And here's where you find that. So I'll just use a couple more minutes before we split to back off of anything new and technical and just show you a couple things as to how to teach Lightroom to behave the way you want it to. Any questions before I go anywhere else? Right? I know that often I have that little bit of confidence that says, yeah, I'll remember that. It doesn't happen all the time. So luckily you have each other to ask questions, and I'll hopefully have this video for you too. So in Lightroom, you have preferences. I think in the PC version they might live in the edit menu, I'm not sure. You have preferences for the application, and then you have preferences just for this catalog. So one of the preferences is if you want to get your presets, let's say you do a bunch of develop presets or import presets. Remember the import presets we did this morning? Let's say you want to share those to a different computer or you want to send them to somebody else. The preferences part of Lightroom lets you see the develop presets or all the presets by clicking a button, and it opens them up as to where they really live in your computer, which is, believe me, down deep in the depths of places that most people don't want to go. So you can literally copy these. They're very, very small files, seldom over half a megabyte. And you can copy and paste that whole thing in. If you do it by email, you must stuff them first. Email will dissect those things and you'll never get them to work. So stuff them first into a... Everybody know how to compress and stuff stuff? Yeah, okay. Again, it's that right click. So that's where they live. And then I also wanted to show you that this is the external editor. This is what tells Lightroom what to do when you go outside of Lightroom. So by default, knowing that you've installed the Creative Cloud, so that's always going to be Lightroom and Photoshop, it knows that you've got Photoshop, and it expects that you want to save your finished Photoshop file as a TIFF. So these are the defaults. The only thing that I changed from default was 16-bit to 8. The best thing to do is to do 16-bit. I had changed it to 8 just to create lessons that didn't have big files in them. So the default is TIFF as opposed to PSD, because you can compress it. ProPhoto RGB, did anyone talk to you about color spaces? What are you guys on? Adobe? Okay. So ProPhoto, do you know the difference between ProPhoto RGB and Adobe RGB? All right. Mini rabbit hole here. I included under the Photoshop reference docs in lessons week 1, PS color space choices. Right? Who's a geek, right? So a color space is a measurement of all the colors that are possible, and it's called a profile, right? So when you go to print in the next room, that Epson printer has a profile that says, from this file, I can print these kinds of colors. If you use sRGB, which was invented to get web-based internet files to look good on most monitors, the S, one could say, stands for stupid, because it's a small color space that desperately compresses a lot of your good colors that your camera recorded. I'm sure that the S didn't stand for stupid when they invented it. It's probably stands for the word standard or something. But look how small the color space is. Here's Adobe RGB. It's a bigger color space. Look at ProPhoto. It's huge. The thing is, you can't see all of ProPhoto because our monitors can't see it yet. Most of our monitors can see almost all or all of Adobe RGB. So if you want to be what you see is what you get, that's the color space. If you want to future-proof your files so that when we get better and better monitors that see more outside of Adobe RGB, then use ProPhoto. And the reason I brought all this up is that you can set Lightroom so that it will automatically choose that color space when you export. Because the raw file doesn't have a color space yet. It's everything your sensor recorded. Used to be Canon camera sensors made reds that were really saturated. Like you photograph a red rose on a sunny day, you couldn't see all the different reds in there. Every camera has its bias. The idea of a really good sensor is it has less bias and more of an open color space, so that when you choose ProPhoto or choose Adobe RGB, you have a wide range of tones and tints in every possible hue. So this should be defaulted in your computer, but if it isn't, set it to TIFF ProPhoto 16-bit, whatever resolution you want. I don't know what have they asked you to set up for the printers here for your resolution? Anything? They probably haven't talked about it. So 300's like the default norm for publishing. However, Epson printers use 240 and 360, but the RIP is the computer that allows you to go from your thumb drive to the printer. Who knows what that uses? So just leave it on 300 because that's kind of the national average. And then the compression, if you're using a bit depth of 16-bit to get the most you possibly can from your files for editing, especially if you're dealing with skin tones and clouds and things that have a lot of gradations. Zip is a way that you can compress these TIFFs so that they're manageable. They're going to be big because they're 16-bit files, especially if you start to layer them. But at least when you close those files, the zip will make it smaller. So that's why that's set up that way. If you choose to work in 8-bit, you'll have a choice between zip and LZW. LZW works better with 8-bit files than zip. So again, TMI, right? You don't need to remember all this, but most of you will be keeping your stuff on 16-bit, and I advise you do it. It's going to eat up more hard drive space. They're going to be bigger files, but you're already probably doing it and you're used to it. No worries, right? Memory's cheap. This part's for if you get any plugins, you can teach Lightroom to open those plugins in similar types of files. So I'm not going to go into that. But go through these just once in a while and kind of see what's there. It's not that important that you remember them all. The one that I think is very, very important is that when you have your main catalog in front of you, one thing that's helpful is to go to the catalog settings, and there's one thing that's not by default checked off the way I think it should be. This is also where you determine how often you want Lightroom to ask you if you want to back it up. The one called metadata, the third tab in catalog settings, you want to always have checked off automatically write changes to XMP. Why that's not default checked off on some iterations of Lightroom, I have no idea. But what that does is it means that if you make changes in Lightroom, it's writing constantly to an XMP file if you're not going to convert to DNG. So you do want that checked off. I've had students work for long periods of time on files only to find out that on their removable hard drive there wasn't any data that they could see in any other version of Lightroom. So you want to have that checked off. And really, I think that's as much as I can pump into your brains today. So you're probably all bleary and thinking, why did I start this course? But it's all good, right? All right, let's stop the recording and see what happened. I have to be careful I don't swear a whole lot in this class. It's all being recorded.